All right, perfect. Okay, great. So this is the talk is called Formalize the Hunt. So again, just a little bit about me. As John alluded to, I'm an information security engineer with a local bank here in the Valley. I also teach for SANS periodically when I have some time, and I teach mostly on the cyber defense curriculum, the SIM with Tactical Analytics course. I also teach security operations, continuous monitoring, and the cybersecurity essentials and the advanced cybersecurity defense course. I've been working. I worked for Intel for quite a while. I worked for Wells Fargo here in the Valley. I obviously have a wife and 4 kids. Who my daughter just graduated from Grand Canyon with a degree in cybersecurity. So if anybody is looking for entry-level cybersecurity people, she is definitely in the market and looking for a job. So, interested. If anybody has any opportunities, please let me know. I love continuous learning education. That's part of the reason why I like to present here, because it forces me to actually do additional research that I may forego because life gets in the way sometimes. So again, I just recently certified a couple of new SANS certs, right? The Purple Team course, the GDAT, Defending Advanced Threats, and the Open Source Intelligence beta, which I took a few years ago, but I was offered the beta exam and just recently found out I passed a couple days ago. So very happy about that, right? I love certifications. I love SANS. I love teaching and training and just continuous education. So the reason I chose this talk is, oftentimes, when I talk to organizations about threat hunting, they're interested in doing it, but they don't really know how, or they don't really understand what it means to threat hunt. And sometimes if I do consulting or I work with some third parties, I ask them, are you threat hunting? They're like, well, we know we should, or we've started to, but we really don't know why or what the basis is, right? So again, hunting is just not looking for, it's not just going out and looking for stuff, right? It's not just saying, hey, I'm going to start searching for whatever, right? Or at least it should be. A lot of organizations say, well, again, I've hired a threat hunting team, or I've hired one individual or two individuals to start hunting, and then they go out and they search through some logs, or they start looking for some activity that they believe to be malicious. But what I really would like to do is to formalize the hunt, right? Go in and create a formalized process, so that way you actually have deliverables from the hunting, right? Again, the goal of hunting is not necessarily, I mean, it's obviously to find evil in your environment. It's assuming compromise. It's going in and understanding that if we start looking for these activities before we're compromised, or even, we may not realize we're compromised, but if we start looking for certain activities, and the thought process behind threat hunting is really that. It's to say, hey, if I knew I was already breached, what are the type of things I would look for, right? Understanding the adversary, looking at these various different tools, techniques, and practices, these TTPs, these things that actors and attackers generally do once they're on a system, right? Indications of lateral movement, indications of persistence, going through and doing reconnaissance. So we should start looking for that activity before we're breached, or before we know we're breached, to be proactive, to find that activity before we actually are compromised, so that I can detect it and hopefully get these actors off of my network, so that way I don't end up on next month's breach from Eric, right? On next month's Eric's briefs to say, hey, look at how dumb these people are, right? And again, it's really one of the goals of threat hunting is to never have to hunt again. And when I say that, I mean never have to hunt for that specific thing again. Because when you go and you do a hunt properly, at least in my opinion, you create use cases that to apply to your security information event management tool. You create rules to be able to prevent or detect that activity in the tools that you have, right? At your intrusion detection system, intrusion prevention systems, your endpoint protection suites, whatever particular tool set you're using, the goal of the hunt is to say, hey, here is something that I should be looking for, and you hunt for it and you see if you can find it, but then you say, okay, how can I automate this? How can I go through and that thing I looked for, that particular search syntax that I used in the SIM, or that particular command line command that I wrote in PowerShell or in Bash or whatever, can I write a script to look for that on a periodic basis? So that way I don't have to hunt for that in the future. I just have a script that runs for it and spits out the report and says, hey, here you go for these 5 systems, right? Okay. Also, you want to formalize the hunt really to show a return on investment, right? There should be clear deliverables that you can define from hunting, so that way you can prove to your management team that this is a very beneficial thing to do, right? Because oftentimes it's hard to quantify, hey, I'm going to go start looking for activity. Because when we see that, right, you're going to see certain things occur or certain outputs of beginning to threat hunt that you may or may not expect, and that management may think are a bad idea. Okay, so if you formalize this process, right, you're going to get improved capability, your team's going to be more efficient, and you're going to get better returns when you start to do detection and use better use of your current existing tool set that you have. At least that's the hope. Okay, so
two questions.
yeah.
One is, how do you, where does threat hunting come in as opposed to using the tools that you should have deployed? And then my second question is how do you connect, or where is your incident response in threat hunting connected, if they're connected?
Sure. So to answer your first question, right? So when you're saying, you know, where is threat hunting in terms of using the tools that you should have deployed, the threat hunting team or individual, whoever's doing that, right, should be taking advantage of your existing tool set, right? So again, I'll get a little bit into that, but again, if you have, you know, a security implement and event management tool, or you have your logs that are being generated, maybe on the endpoints, maybe on, you know, your firewalls, your intrusion detection, intrusion prevention systems. One of the things the hunt team should be doing is looking at those logs, doing a deeper dive into those events to say, okay, hey, this is what we're seeing in the logs, and can I get better use of those? Okay, so again, taking advantage of your existing tool set and saying, how can I get more out of what I already have, right? Instead of just relying on what the vendor says or maybe built-in use cases, saying, hey, this is what I'm seeing in, you know, in the Twitter sphere. This is what I'm seeing based upon a recent breach that occurred. And this is how they compromise that environment. And can I look for that type of activity in my environment? And we're not looking, again, you know, I'm not looking for a specific IP address or a domain name, but we're looking for more behavior-based activities, right? This looks like lateral movement. This looks like some abnormality in my environment, and I can use my existing tool set to be able to define that. Now, with regards to your second question, in my experience, right, your hunt team generally will, you know, identify certain things, and that will be passed over to your incident response team. So again, you can do hunting post-hunting, but there's also pre-hunting. And ideally, what you want to do is pre-incident hunting. Okay, so sometimes the incident response team is engaged by the incident response team to say, hey, we know we're breached. Can you help us based upon your understanding of the environment, your protocols, your systems? Can you help us determine the scope of this particular incident, right? We know that this machine is compromised, but can you help us to determine how many other machines, if any, are compromised as well? But ideally, you would like your hunt team to be more proactive and find that activity that then passes over to incident response team to then take that information to then address it and then perform, you know, your standard, whatever process you have for incident response. If you follow like something like PICRL, right, where you're, you know, doing the identity containment, eradication, recovery, and all that stuff. Okay, so hopefully, does that answer your question, Eric? Or at least somewhat?
Yeah, I just wanted to make sure everyone understood. Perfectly nailed it.
Okay, great. So again, why you should threat hunt, right? Well, and one thing, again, I'm only half joking here, but it's the new hotness in the industry, right? Everyone's talking about threat hunting. So again, if you're not doing it, you know, people are going to say, well, are you doing threat hunting? Well, why aren't you doing threat hunting? Again, your management's going to come to you and they're going to go to Black Hat or DEF CON, or they're going to hear some presentation and say, hey, you should be doing threat hunting. So again, if you already have, or you've begun threat hunting, if you haven't, you should be, right? And again, you know, it's not just because it's a new hotness or the new buzzword in the industry, so to speak, but it's very valuable in my opinion, right? Again, it takes that concept of assumed compromise, these things that, you know, a lot of organizations have been doing for a while, but some of us have just started doing. One of my favorite outcomes, and one of the reasons why I think you should threat hunt, is that it really does provide a way to improve your visibility and understanding of your environment. When you start digging into these logs, when you start looking at this network traffic, when you start digging into your endpoints, your analysts are going to get better in tune with actually what's going on. Okay, so it's going to improve not only your understanding of your systems, your network, and the protocols, but also your tool set. You're going to find new ways, as I said, to expand the capabilities of your existing tool set. Because you're going to say, hey, I'm going to do some research as part of that. The other thing that I like to utilize it for, and one of my favorite things, is that it actually helps you to train the eye, right? So again, I think I mentioned this in a previous talk, but you know, one of the things that when you start looking for things, you start to notice things more often, right? If you ever, for example, you know, again, this is more of a real world example, but have you ever been car shopping and you go through and let's say you're looking for a Honda Accord, right? So you're driving around, you're considering buying a Honda Accord, and you notice that every car you see on the road is a Honda Accord because now you're in tune with that. You're picking out and you're like, oh, that's a blue one, that's a green one, that's a 2007 because I can tell by the lights, right? Because you've done your research and you start to see that stuff, and that's one of the outcomes of a hunt, right? You start to notice things that you may not have noticed before because you're now in tune with your understanding of your system, okay? And it's fun, right? I mean, if you're eyes on glass every day in the sim, right, and you tag that person, right, that junior analyst, you say, hey, come with me, we're going to go and spend 2 hours hunting. They're going to be excited, right? They're going to be motivated. They're going to be, oh, this is really cool because I've been eyes on glass for 6 months just looking at events and clearing alerts, and again, now I'm able to do something outside of my normal activity now, and I'm learning, right? It motivates these people. It helps them to get better understanding of your environment, and it really helps them to improve their, in my opinion, in my experience, it helps them to improve their job satisfaction, right? Because again, if you worked any time in a SOC, being eyes on glass for 6 months can be soul crushing work, right? It becomes monotonous. It becomes very, very, boring. And when you say, hey, let's go do some threat hunting, let's spend let's take a couple of hours on Wednesday and we'll start hunting. And again, you as the lead analyst or you as the senior analyst will go and you'll lead the hunt, but you'll engage these junior analysts to start, going in and running certain commands on your endpoints, running certain, searches inside of your SIEM to be able to find this activity, right? So what are some of the things you should expect once you start doing this, right? If it's done right, you're gonna have more incidents. And people are like, whoa, wait a second, more incidents? I thought our goal was to actually reduce incidents. Well, once you start looking for this stuff, you're going to find things, right? You're going to find misconfigurations a lot. That's what I find a lot. Systems that are behaving abnormally, you're going to find breaches, right? But again, if I find it, and my goal here, Richard Baitlick, who is one of my favorite authors and one of my favorite people in the industry, he wrote the book, The Tao of Network Security Monitoring, back in 2004, and he rewrote it, The Practice of Network Security Monitoring, 2012. And one of the quotes from that book says, right, if I go out and I find the actor before they achieve their goals, they haven't won, right? Again, we often take this mindset of, hey, initial compromise, and if we get hacked, then the hacker wins, right? But if I detect them and get them off my network before they achieve their goal, I've won the entire war. They may have won 5 battles, they may have compromised 15 systems, but if they don't get to my crown jewels, they don't get to the systems, the data, and the information that's important to them, that's valuable to them, that's valuable to me, I've won that war. And so that's what we're really trying to find, right? So we're going to find more incidents, but hopefully the incidents are going to have a much lower impact. Ideally, once you start doing this, you're going to identify various use cases in your environment that you can now put into your SIEM, right? Because you're going to say, hey, this search that I used to find this, it's not already existing. So now I can go in and I can have it as a saved search, or I can build a visualization or a dashboard out of that, so that now my SOC analysts that are eyes on glass can say, hey, I'm looking for this activity, right? Hey, look at these user agents that are abnormal, right? And again, I didn't notice looking for user agents that are less than 5 characters. Oh, that's interesting to me. That's substantive. It's something maybe I should look for. Okay, obviously, as stated, improve visibility and understanding your environment. You're going to increase your detection capabilities because now you're taking this hunt that you did and you're then turning that into new SEM rules. You're turning it into new IDS, IPS rules. You're turning it into endpoint protection signatures, things that you can actually put into practice to find that activity. Okay, ideally you want to automate a lot of this work because again, you don't want to have to do it over and over and over again. And you're going to identify some blind spots and some gaps in your current security infrastructure that you may need, right? One of the things we found is that, hey, we would really like to start implementing certain tools, right? It would be really valuable for me to have Sysmon on some of these systems so I can start looking for new processes, right? WMI, calls being used. Maybe DLLs being loaded that I didn't see in this environment, right? So how do you actually do this, right? What's the process of formalizing the hunt? You need to schedule it, right? If it's not scheduled, it won't happen because life will get in the way. Your normal day-to-day activities of just dealing with your events and your current tool set that you have will take precedence over everything, right? So make an agreement with your executive team to say, hey, I'm going to schedule this and I'm going to use, start small, right? Start with a couple hours a week and just say, hey, we're going to go out and we're going to search. Don't do it on a Friday night or Friday afternoon when you think it's going to be slow because you're going to find stuff, right? I recommend like a Tuesday mid-morning afternoon. So when you find that stuff, you can kick it over to incident response and you don't hopefully end up ruining everyone's weekend, right? I've had people that have started their threat hunt on, we're going to start threat hunting on Friday at 3 o'clock. And then at 3:57 on Friday, you find a bunch of activity and then, oh, everyone cancel your weekend plans. It's time to kick off incident response and everyone's going to hate you, right? Again, I'm not saying don't, that's not a good time. I mean, it's not valuable, but again, there's probably a better time to start doing it. But again, you're going to find sometimes where you may, be better than others, right? So again, you have more time to address it and you have a full complement of your staff there to be able to deal with it because people have it cut out early for the weekend and things like that. So start small, right? Begin with the end in mind. I know this sounds cliche, but define some simple goals for the threat, right? Maybe just start with a single technique, right? One particular technique, maybe one line of business, one VLAN, maybe even just one system. Hey, I'm going to look at my web server that's exposed to the internet, and I'm going to look for web shells. I'm going to look for certain logs where I'd indicate someone's trying to do some scanning or maybe trying to do, something using the OWASP top 10 against me, right? So some type of command injection or SQL injection or, cross-site request forgery, right? And again, you will understand these various techniques better the more you look at this, okay? There's a huge community of people that are already doing this. Take advantage of that, right? Use your threat intelligence, your vendor resources, blogs, Twitter, okay? And then document and share what you find as long as you're able to do that, right? Again, obviously redact any sensitive information, but share your techniques, share some searches, right? You can use something like Misp, the malware information sharing platform. Again, you can develop your own threat intelligence and share that out in Misp or in, whatever sticks, taxi, whatever you want to do. If you are a part of an ISAC, information sharing and collaboration platform, you can actually share that. Again, we have the FSISAC. We share a lot of information with other financial services, right? They're our competitor, but we are facing a common enemy that is trying to hack all of the banks. So what we do is, hey, I share with Bank of America. I share with Chase. Because again, and they share with me, and we again work together to try to minimize fraud because again, it hurts the entire industry when that stuff occurs. So I'm gonna go over my approach, right? A recommended approach. This is not a foolproof approach. Again, there's a lot of gaps and issues with this one, but hey, this is something you can start with if you haven't already begun to formalize your threat hunting, okay? So one of the things I like to do is, again, start with that single technique to search for, right? Begin with the end in mind, starting small. I'm going to think about what am I looking for, okay? MITRE ATT&CK is probably one of my favorite resources to use, right? It's not perfect, but it's one of the best things we have in the industry because it outlines those TTPs, those tools, techniques, and procedures that are common amongst adversaries that are going out and compromising system, right? This is proven stuff that attackers do, right? And it walks through the entire kill chain, right? From persistence to privilege escalation to lateral movement to, backdoors and access. And you can go through and just choose one of those techniques and start to look for that. Another great resource is the Atomic Red Team. Maybe you don't know what that activity looks like, right? Again, MITRE gives you some useful information, but you don't know actually how it's going to look in your environment if someone tries that. So with the Atomic Red allows you to run these what they call these really short atomic tests in your environment, generate this event and say, okay, well, what does it look like in my environment? What event IDs get created? What changes on the system? What things can I start to look for and determine, can I see that in my log somewhere and then push that out to, writing a script or to some type of security information event management tool. If you're not familiar with Sigma, Sigma is an outstanding project by Florian Ross, and and the group over at Next Run Systems, what they're trying to do with Sigma is to say, we want to standardize rule language for SEM rules. So if I go out and I write a use case or I write a search in Splunk, I can then go out and save that and share it as a Sigma rule. And then if you're using ArcSight or QRadar or the Elastic Stack or whatever, you can then take this and put it into Sigma C and convert it from my Splunk search over into an Elasticsearch query, or convert it into a use case in, Logarithm. And so now I can take advantage of the community, someone who's already done that. Obviously, I'll have to change the field names. Maybe I have to modify the index names, but that's what Sigma Converter does. The Sigma Converter does that for you. Okay. Obviously, you have in threat intelligence that you can take advantage of to look for those indicators of compromise, but focus again on that higher level, on that hierarchy of needs, right? If you look at David Bianco's hierarchy of needs, the TTPs, those tools, techniques, and procedures are really what you want to focus on, not so much on the lower level, right? IPs and domains and hashes that can be easily changed and modified by an individual. Okay, Twitter, right? Twitter is one of my favorite resources. I used to think Twitter was the dumbest thing ever. And again, I'm not still sure that it's not, but again, a lot of really smart people share information on Twitter that you can take advantage of, right? Blogs, Google, etc. Your vendor white papers and recommendations, obviously take that with a grain of salt, because they may be just providing you documentation to sell your product. But again, oftentimes you can find useful techniques and tools that you can use to be able to, even if you're not going to use their vendor product, you can take that technique and try to apply it in whatever product you're using, or even just with the raw log. Okay, document as you go, right? What worked, what didn't, where you see gaps. I'm going to talk about Palantir that has created what's called their alert detection strategy, which is a template you can use to be able to start documenting some of this, so that way you can, utilize this for information, right? So when we look at MITRE ATT&CK, right? So MITRE, go back here. So the MITRE ATT&CK framework, I kind of talked about that, right? And you choose one technique, right? So for example, I go into the MITRE ATT&CK framework and I choose this next technique, which is create an account. And you see here, it says, right, adversaries may create an account to maintain access to the victim system. And it gives you not only the breakdown of that technique and what to look for, but it also gives you some other commands to run. So for example, hey, how is this run? Well, I can do net user, or I can do user add. Okay, so if I'm on a Windows system, I can go and do some net user. On a Unix system, I can do user add. And on a Windows system, it's going to generate event ID 4720. Now, local users in my environment should never, ever, 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 ever happen, right? So again, event ID 4720, that should be, in a lot of environments, if you're using a domain environment, that is something that should be, in some cases, an automatic alert. Okay, because again, if I see someone creating, especially on a desktop system, someone's creating a new local user account, I want to raise the red flag and I want to investigate, hey, why is that occurring? Okay, maybe on a server you might see some of that, and it may be less of a urgent request, but on the desktop environment, I see 4720, I'm alerting, I'm investigating. But if I don't know to go to MITRE to look to and understand what that is, I may not even have that enabled in my audit policy. Okay. So again, one of the things I was doing as I was putting this together, I went and ran net user /add Tim on one of my Windows systems to generate a log. And then I went into the log and I'm like, hey, where is it? And it wasn't there, right? I had no event ID 4720. So why not? Well, because my audit policy wasn't set up and configured to log new user creation events. So I had to go to my audit policy, enable that, and then I reran again and said, hey, there you go, right? So again, that's one of the ways to identify things that may be missing and gaps in your environment. So in our example, we have net user, user add, event ID 4720. Here's the example from the Atomic Red team. So Atomic Red team says, hey, these are just those really quick tests that you can run in your environment to actually go out and run those and to identify that activity in your system, right? So for example, it says, hey, how do I do this? I don't know. Net user /add, then username and password. And then I go to my logs and look for event ID 4720. If I want to do it in PowerShell, I do the new local user commandlet and then -name, the username. And then I can even create one with no password, right? My policy may require me to do that, but I can put in a password, and then it shows me how to clean it up after the fact. So I can run this in a test environment, figure out what logs get generated, and then go out and then address that, right? So the Atomic Red team has just a tremendous amount of tools that you can take advantage of. Okay, let me just copy this over here. I'm just going to move this over and show you what it looks like, right? So if you haven't seen Atomic Red, it's an outstanding resource. I'm just going to pop this up over here, right? So again, you see here, here's the description of the attack, right? And here's actually how to create a user on a, oops, sorry. You guys aren't seeing this at all, are you? Are you seeing the,
yeah, we are. We're seeing the browser window. We're seeing the browser window.
Okay, sorry, because I'm seeing something different. So, okay, that's okay. So the browser, again, you see here, and it's labeled the T1136. This is maps right over to the MITRE ATT&CK framework, right? So if I go to MITRE ATT&CK and I go to, you know, what is it? It's going to be probably persistence, right? It's under persistence, and I can create account right here. Boom, and here's the same technique, right? And you have these tags, right? 1136. And then what I do is I use this and I tag this into my SIM. And I say, hey, look for T1136. And then I can, all of these techniques, I can look for that type of activity. But the Atomic Red team, right? We have these very easy to run commands that you can generate this activity. And again, these aren't the only ones, right? I go here and I go to Atomics. And you say, you know, there's some of these are, I mean, a lot of you probably, oh, I've created user accounts from the command line thousands of times, right? But, you know, how many of you know how to do DLL search order hijacking from the command line? You know, I don't know how to do that. But if I go in here and I look at this and I say, okay, let me go to the Windows matrix, and I come over here and I say, let me go and find this and see where it is. So DLL sideloading or DLL search order hijacking. Okay, I'm not actually going to do this, but again, you see here, it's real simple to do, right? Again, you copy this, you know, updater.exe, and then you run this command using your amc.dll, right? And then you're able to see what does that look like in my environment, right? And it's pretty easy to do and pretty straightforward. And then it tells you how to clean it up so that way you can clean up that test environment without any issues. Okay, so come over here, right? So again, just a very good way, and it shows you here's how I do it on in command.exe. Here's how I do it in PowerShell. Here's how you user add in a Linux system and even on Mac OS. Okay, so again, it gives me the ability to start to use some information. All right, another thing, security Twitter. Okay, here's, you know, again, proof of concept using signed vulnerable driver to remove process creation callbacks to blind EDRs on the system, right? So again, it's going to write up in sample code to do that. So again, what you can do is take that, run it in your test environment, figure out what it looks like, what events get generated, what things on that endpoint on that system change, and then go through and look for that and search for that in your environment. Or security Twitter, right? So again, here I r/blueteamsec, one of my favorite Reddit feeds, to be able to look for that, right? Again, lots of good resources there to take advantage of the community. So now that we have some resources and know what to look for, how do we actually hunt, right? So again, you want to look at your log, okay? You have your Windows event logs, endpoint protection suite logs, and EDR tools, endpoint detection response. Sysmon is one of my favorite utilities altogether, right? There's lots of third-party utilities. I love the sysinternal suite stuff, auto runs, to look for that. At the network side, if you have your network sensors, right, your IDS, IPS, tools like Bro/Zeek, right? Used to be called Bro, now it's called Zeek. More of that, you know, political correctness coming in. You can do full PCAP with tools like NetWitness or commercial tools like NetWitness. Your NetFlow logs, firewall logs can give you some insight, right? So going back to our example, right? I go through and I say, hey, I'm going to go into my SIM, into Splunk here, and I'm going to look for event code 4720. And it says, yeah, here do I have log name security, Microsoft Windows accounting, event ID 4720. And I go in and I just do some manual searches in there. And I say, okay, do I see any of that activity? I'm utilizing the tools that I already have to search for the activity. Okay, now can I then take that or I can search through the raw logs, right? So again, here's just me looking inside of the GUI, or I can go and use PowerShell, get win event, log name security, where ID equal 4720, and then format it as a list. And I have all of the information that I can utilize to begin scripting this out. Right now, I'm just doing the basics. I'm doing my manual searches in my SIM. I'm looking at the raw logs on the endpoint, and I'm figuring out how can I detect this activity on those systems that may be indicative, right? So again, I used Atomic Red. I tested and said, okay, how would I find that on the system? Now, if in the GUI, I can't really automate that so much, but again, I can go in and use the Windows, PowerShell to then script this out and say, okay, now let me look for these certain types of activities: new user creations, failed logins, successful logins, new service creations, whatever the case may be, to find that. And now these manual searches that I do to manually perform it on my SIM, these now become visualizations in my SIM, and these visualizations get saved to create dashboards. So now my security incident, my security operations center can look for this, and they have it available for them. So now I never have to search for that event ID 4720 again. I have a dashboard that says new local users, and every time a new one gets created, that log gets ingested in my SIM, the automatic use case gets generated, and I say, hey, wait a second, it's always blank, and now all of a sudden I'm seeing a new local user called helpdesk 31337. Hey, that's highly suspicious. Why is that being created on the CFO's laptop? Okay, now I have a piece of information. I've hunted for it in the past. I know what to look for, and I may not find anything as part of the hunt. But as part of the hunt, I now know what to look for, and that automated search now becomes that manual search now becomes an automated search or a visualization or a dashboard that I use to provide that resource to my security operations center so that they can see that activity over and over and over and over again. Okay, then we have utilities like Sigma. As I say, Sigma is a way to go out and take my SIM rules and then standardize it. So again, regardless of what specific SIM you're using, whether you're using Elasticsearch or ArcSight or QRadar or Logarithm or Cafe Nitro or Microsoft, cloud-based services, whatever, I can then take that particular search that someone else in the community created, and I can utilize it and import it into the Sigma converter, and it will apply my custom field mappings, my index names, my whatever specifics are for my environment, and convert it over to a search or to a use case that I can take advantage of in my environment. So when we look at this, right, I'm just going to pop this over in here. And this is what, Sigma does. It's, again, you have your Sigma converter, a good talk from Thomas Patsky and Florian Roth. But again, there's also other resources that you can take advantage of, such as SOC Prime. So again, if you haven't got sigma.socprime.com, let me go and show you this, right? Now I don't even have to use Sigma C. So if you see what we're seeing here, I go in and say, hey, let me go in and look for, again, look at these Windows rules, and I can look for, let's say WMI persistence, okay? So in here, I have a WMI persistence rule, and what does it look like in Splunk? Okay, I go and click translate and says, hey, here's my source, Windows event log, right? So I would put my own custom index, and I can look for event code 5861. And then this search here, I just copy this out. I take it over into my Splunk instance. I drop it in there. I may have to change a couple of index names or source types or things like that in Splunk, but that's real quick to do. And now I have a rule that allows me to hunt for that particular type of activity. And then I can say, okay, now that I've hunted, did I find anything? No, but can I use that to create a visualization or a dashboard that automatically looks for that activity so I don't have to search for it again? And then keep it up to date, keep checking, keep modifying it in my environment. Okay, then once we have that, then we want to take that information that we found and we want to share it out with the community. Okay, so Misp is the malware information sharing platform. It's a free open source way to share information. Again, it has a great web UI. You can do REST API calls to be able to share your information, to be able to pull information from other people that you trust. All right, it's very easy to import and export these various different indicators into your environment. So for example, I have all my events that I've generated. I decide that I'm willing to share these 3 events, right? You can use things like the traffic light protocol to say, okay, anything that's red, don't share. Anything that's, amber, maybe, get a discussion on that. If it's green, it's something that's well-known. Share that out with the community, and then you drop it in your shared events, and it gets shared over to Organization 2 that is subscribed to your feed. And you can do the same thing. Organization 2 provides their their events that they're sharing with the community, and then you can pull those in and utilize that to do hunting in your environment. Now, documentation, right? I am not a huge fan of documentation. In fact, I hate documenting stuff, right? You know, just like it says, I hate it. But it's very valuable, especially when it comes to hunting, because it allows you to utilize it as a knowledge base. Because again, when you're eyes on glass on the sim, you do things every day over and over and over again. And again, this knowledge base then becomes the basis for things like playbooks and run guides for your analysts. But it also helps you to, again, I've utilized my documentation before. I've been doing a hunt or I've been, you know, dealing with a particular incident or event or something, or a new outbreak. And I'm like, how did I do that? And I go back to my document and I'm like, oh yeah, here's that search I ran. I just modify a couple of different things in my search, and now I just copy and paste, and it saves me a tremendous amount of time, right? By documenting, you demonstrate that you do have a formal process, and then you now have some way to talk to your executive management team and say, hey, look, we have a formal process. It'd be really valuable by, you know, this process that we're doing with just, you know, on the site every couple of hours, when we've been able to find this or develop these new use cases or provide these benefits and these wins to our environment. And so now it gives you some justification to actually go to management and say, hey, we would like to have a formal hunt team. We would want to basically have a team that their full-time job is to hunt all the time. Okay, but having that formalized hunting develops that formalized process. It helps you to keep track of the IOCs that you generate. And again, it's just a very good, useful resource for providing recommendations for management for new tools, gaps that you've identified, and ways to identify additional resources that you may need to improve your hunting capabilities. Now, a pretty good resource that I like is Palantir, right? So Palantir has created this process called their alerting detection strategy. And right, there's a blog post on it that walks you through the process. But when you look at it, right, it goes through this process and has a framework, right? So it defines the goal of that alert, right? Your categorization, how does it map over to something like the, you know, the MITRE ATT&CK framework? You have an abstract of what you're doing to be able to do that. And, you know, I'm going to go ahead and show you this, right? So again, you have this abstract. It provides some technical context as to what you are looking for. So that analyst, that new analyst that comes in, you can point them over and say, hey, let's read all these ADS documents so you get a good understanding of some of the types of events and some of the things that we're dealing with. And it also helps them to use that as a knowledge base to be able to learn how to use your tools, what tools you have in your environment, and maybe where some blind spots or assumptions that you made in order to do that. You also list out the potential false positives, so that way when someone sees that activity, they can go over to that document and say, oh yeah, is this a false positive? Well, what does a false positive look like? And, oh, maybe when it's coming from this particular system or this particular source generates a lot of false positives, right? If it's going to Sophos, oh, that looks like a DGA, but Sophos, activity to download and update their virus definitions uses, DGA type of domains, and that's a false positive. So I can eliminate that from my search and then make it a much more refined search. Okay, and then you provide a response. What do you do when you find this activity? Okay, so there's a couple of these various different ones on there. Here's an example of one that actually looks for ADS examples in your environment. Oops, let me go after here. Oops, I didn't copy this in there, but let me just pull this up. So when I go here, and let me pull this. Oh, man. So when I go over here, here's the actual Palantir detection strategy. If you go over here to some ADS examples, and here's a example of unusual PowerShell host process. Okay, so you see it provides a technical context, right? We're built on .NET Framework. It gives you information. The PowerShell DLL may be loaded into several processes, which are known as PowerShell hosts. It gives you the understanding of that information. Here's some blind spots or assumptions you have. SEM is successfully indexing tooling logs. These are the things that we assume are in place in order for us to capture this, right? Things that I put in my assumptions are, if we have sysmon enabled on this endpoint. And if that's not the case, we're not going to be able to find that, right? So again, here's some examples of false positives. Here's how you can do some validation. So again, very similar to some of the atomic red team stuff, things you can run to be able to perform that type of attack and see how it looks like on that system. And then what do we expect the response to be if we see this activity? Okay, so I know I went through this quick, but again, I know I'm running out of time. I wanted to fit it in the time allotted, but again, you should be hunting, right? If you're not, you should be. And again, it's fun, it's interesting. It takes away some of that monotony of just being eyes on glass in the Security Operations Center. If you're gonna do it, you might as well formalize the process, right? Start small, start with one technique, and then build from there, right? You document your work, and so that way you can have a repeatable process, you can have a knowledge base, and you can improve upon that process, okay? Use this information that we have to find evil in your environment, get better understanding of your systems, your networks, your protocols, and your tool sets that you have, automate your work, and then protect your customers and your brand.
So quick question to Tim, are you okay with all this stuff being on YouTube per our
Yes.
standard?